Hey friend, thanks for listening to the Fixate Phoenix podcast. We are praying that you are blessed by this week's message. If you would like to partner with the future of Fixate, you can visit fixatephx.com/give.
God, we thank you for this morning. God, and we thank you that in this place, it is you who is our purpose, our safety, our belonging, our significance, and our love. God, for you created purpose, significance, belonging, safety, and love, and you are where we find it. So for those in this room searching for purpose, you are our purpose. For those who are searching for safety, you are our safety. For those searching for belonging and to belong, you are what we have always belonged to. For those searching for love, may they know that you gave your life in the greatest act of love for them. So God, would you fulfill all the longings of our souls today and every day. In Jesus' name, and the church said, amen. We're jumping in part 2, 10 to Temple, part 2, money on my mind. Money on my mind. Now, if you were here last week and you've been a member of our church any length of time, you know in October, we spend the entire month talking about finances. Now, the reason being, believe it or not, that many historians on the low end believe that Jesus talks about money and possessions. The low end, 20%. High end, if you kind of broaden the spectrum, 30% of his teachings equate to money, finances, possessions, greed. What is it that we live for? It's a pretty profound metric, and I would even say what's funny is we've all been in church long enough to kind of acknowledge this about ourselves, that when you first open the Bible, it's easy to be like, this has no meaning, merit, or substance for me at all. Like you read it, you're like, in Leviticus, you're like, okay, I need to drain the blood from my food, and then don't eat this, and then also like, how do we shine the temple basins? Okay, what am I even reading, right? And oftentimes when we're in the Word, it's easy for us to be reading the Word, but also being like, how does this really apply? But the more you study it, the more you engage with it, the more you go deep with it, what you find, though, is that for some reason there is meaning, merit, and prevalence to our lives that transcends season and time. See, from the very beginning, mankind has had a hunger for materialistic possessions, money, whatever it is, or have you will, about affluence. And so what we do is we spend an entire month talking about money, and really it is from the basis of a challenge. And the challenge is this: if you consider Fixate your home church, if you consider yourself a faithful follower of Jesus, once a year in October, we challenge people with a tent to temple offering. Because what we believe is biblically, there is examples of rhythmic sacrifice, and then there's also examples of lavish offering. Meaning, the rhythmic sacrifice is us building the endurance of a life that can walk with God without being bonded to the greed of this world. However, the lavish offering is what kind of breaks it and allows us to go to a different level, and by different level, dimension of seeing God's goodness in the level of sacrifice we partake in. And the reason is this, is if I'm honest, this month, me and my wife, every year in October, give the biggest one-time offering that we've ever given. Now, I'm not going to ask you to do anything that I'm not doing. And the reason being is this, is so often, for me, what I found is I want to develop my faith in every avenue, in every aspect, except my money. Right? God, I want to grow. I want to hear your voice. I want to be close. Definitely don't want to give anymore. Now, why is that? Right? We talk about development. We talk about strengthening. We talk about being a disciple and growing in our faith deeper. My faith going deeper is also my sacrifice going deeper. See, my rhythmic generosity is baseline, which if you were here last week, we talked about baseline rhythmic generosity. But my lavish offering is me saying, God, I trust you. And I create space for you to move in my anxious open-handedness, if you will. And so this month, and it's actually been incredible this month, we're seeking to raise $154,000 to solidify both the tent we are in, but also believe for the temple that God is leading us into. See, many of you maybe aren't familiar with our story. We set up and tear down most weeks here in a wedding venue. And it's actually a biblical aspect because all of mankind's history in the organizational structure of a building is tied to a tent of meeting you find in the Old Testament. Set up and torn down, going through the wilderness. This tent existed for hundreds of years in which mankind had this dwelling place of holy artifacts and a priestly lineage of one of the 12 tribes, the Levites, that would make sure this tent was secure and stable and up to date and taken care of, and worship would be taking place. But one king stepped up, a king by the name of David. David, when he steps up, in his own words, says that, how can I live in a palace while my God lives in a tent? And takes personally the invitation to prepare for one day a temple to be built. That temple would be built by his son Solomon. And he would dedicate the last third of his life into making sure that Solomon had everything he needed for that tent to become a temple. And when we gather here, that is our belief. That as we set up and tear down, as we have all this equipment that we're moving around and praying that it works still and rats don't eat through the ends of, right, Amanda? But as we're doing these things, we're believing God would move on the hearts of his people in a way that would say, I believe that my legacy, my lineage, and my focus is seeing the tent of Fixate become the temple in our city here. So I ask you, I pray, if you're a faithful follower of Jesus, if you consider Fixate your home, base level is I'm rhythmically generous. But in October every year, it's about lavish sacrifice. And what does lavish sacrifice look like to you for ultimately this tent to become a temple? You know, I had to pass the test last year, not just when we were raising money for Tent to Temple, but also when we were... not just when we were giving and raising money, but me and my wife giving, but also I felt like I had to pass the test of Micah. Will you see with my eyes, discern with my heart, and hear in your mind my voice as it means to be generous? Our very first service of our very first weekend of Tent to Temple last year, I was out in the lobby out here. It was 8:30. And as I'm outside, I'm getting some coffee, saying hi to people. And a woman walks in with 3 children. One who is a teenager, young teenager, and then 2 preteens. She walks up to the coffee and she is getting coffee, and I didn't recognize her. So I walk up to her. I say, hey, my name's Micah. What's your name? She said, oh, my name's Vanessa. I said, good. How are we doing today? And she goes, really bad. And I'm like, okay. Right? Like, first off, love the honesty, right? But I'm like, oh, what's going on? She said, well, I was in an abusive situation and I left with my 3 kids with no car and just what we could carry out the door. We slept in a park last night, and you're the first church that we could go to that was open on Sunday, and so we walked here. And where they walked from was actually a place, the east side of Levine. It had been over a 45-minute walk. They'd walked here. And I looked at her, and I'm about to go into service, and I'm about to come upstairs, and then I'm about to raise funds. And as I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay, well, Vanessa, I want you to come up to me after service. I'm not just going to pray with you, but we're going to give you. I come up, and I'm giving Tent to Temple. Let's turn the tent to a temple. Let's raise money for the church to grow. And I'm looking at Vanessa in the back of the room with nothing for her kids that slept in a park. And we stopped in the middle. If you were here at that service, there might be some people who were. I invited her forward, we prayed for her, and I said, hey, I'm supposed to be launching Tent to Temple, but today, this service, everything that comes in, we're going to pay for her a place to stay for a week, clothes and food for the week, and we're going to make a plan for whatever she's going to do. And that day, that's what we did. And Amy, who's one of our board members, she took her and we put her up. And now through the week, what we then realized is that she came to us and was like, hey, there's really nothing for me here. There's nothing. I can't rebuild my life. And we're like, okay, well, what do you want to do? And she goes, I want to move back to Illinois where my family is from. And I want to go back to live with my mom, and I believe I can get on my feet there. And so we're like, okay, we'll get you plane tickets. Well, I don't have ID. I can't do that. And so we ended up paying for her to relocate by bus. We bought her suitcases and clothes and relocated her and her family all the way back to Illinois, where now they still live with their mom and their kids are involved in school, and she has a job to this day. Now, I tell you that because here's the deal. My heart for generosity, I hope you can tell, is not for this house to be bigger and better. It's not for us to produce some incredible entertainment-driven production that will blow your minds and think you're at a U2 conference. Is there even a conference for U2? Anyway, that's the church kid for you. I tell you this because generosity is an overflow in a posture where when God has somebody cross my path and greed I can sense taking control of my heart, I respond with I release. I respond with I release. And when I'm challenging you this month to live rhythmically as a baseline, what does it look like to live rhythmically generous? And this month to practice lavish generosity, I'm not asking you to do things we're not doing that will be the foundation of who we are to become. This is who we are becoming. This is the church that we are. And so with that today, like I said, I want to challenge you throughout service and throughout the rest of this month as we talk about finance. What does lavish sacrifice look like this month? Maybe you're discerning God speaking to you something right now, or you're saying, I want to take some time to pray about this. Once again, the rest of the month, we're going to have this invitation. What does lavish sacrifice look to you? And if this is your church, and if you are a faithful follower of Jesus, I pray that you're going to respond. So with that, today, let's jump into it. Today I'm going to be talking about money on my mind. Now, really what a lot of this stems from is there are three mentalities around money that, believe it or not, you can find in Scripture. Now, the first one is poverty, a poverty mentality. Then you have a prosperity mentality. And then what we're going to talk about today is a stewardship mentality. Now, some of us immediately are like, well, isn't prosperity stewardship? And we're going to spend some time breaking these things down because I'll be honest, as the pastor of our church, what I've found is that where this all starts first is your family of origin. Meaning that for many of us, our view of money can be traced back to what we were raised in and those around us and the perception in which they had about the money they possessed. So before we even get to the brass tacks, we must discuss family of origin. Because poverty is rooted in need, prosperity is rooted in greed, stewardship is rooted in contentment and rootedness that births generosity. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself on differentiation here. Prosperity mindset is I live a disciplined my life of generosity to receive from God from that place. Stewardship is I live disciplined with God in everything, and generosity is just part of it. And from that place, I get to experience God. Prosperity is I give to God, I have this one discipline, and the expectation is I receive. Stewardship is I live with God in everything. And from that place, what I get from God is His nearness. What I get from God is His voice, His Spirit. What I get from God is not materialistic expectation of multiplication. It's rather actually greater contentment and peace. It's not a flashy substance that I can show blessing off as. It's rather a deeply formed life in which people can see my heart is controlled by nothing other than surrender, obedience, and devotion. So before we get into this, though, let's discuss some things around this family of origin. Number one, I want to say this. I was raised in a steward's home. Therefore, to speak of it is something I lean into. My parents always modeled generosity, helping those in need, practicing rhythmically and lavishly. Therefore, the concept was not hard for me to grasp as I ventured into adulthood. I will say this, though. Just because you were raised in a home of good stewardship does not make you a good steward. It just means maybe you had a first-hand experience of a model to live by, but that doesn't mean you actually live by it. Stewardship in the Bible is my time, my attention, and my resource. We will spend some time on understanding this later, but stewardship is the most valuable things I give to God and trust He is the ultimate steward of. My time, my attention, my resource. If you were raised in a home where you watched your parents fight over money, be stressed and anxious, scrape by, or the concept of it can almost trigger the trauma of which you mentally check out in spiritual settings when it's brought up, you've probably seen a level of unhealth. A poverty mentality can be developed when all you've ever known is need and lack. Therefore, to be generous in that place is not a rational thought, it's literally insanity. But the Bible still speaks about people in this state that we will discuss. A poverty mindset is not just that you lack, it's a deep belief that you will never have. Therefore, everything comes in you must use or save, because if you have never seen anyone have anything other than what it takes to survive. You assume the same will be true of your life. Poverty is not a mindset of the present, it's actually a belief about your future. A prosperity mentality is maybe you come from a home of achievers, and you feel the judgment and the nagging feeling of needing to measure up to your parents' success or the peers around you, fueling an unhealthy mindset rooted in achievement. It is a mindset of ability in which we cannot be comfortable, content, or at peace until we achieve at a level that allows us, you ready for this, to be fully in control. Maybe it's rooted in feeling powerless, doubted, or out of control. And now we believe if we get enough money, we won't feel this way. It is a false affirmation, identity, and endgame to view the pursuit of wealth as the measure of which we have in which it is human flourishing. And prosperity mentality follows God just for that outcome and prays to God in hopes he is a genie in the bottle of life. A steward is someone who is prosperous but recognizes where it comes from and that what a heart posture of gratitude and contentment looks like. Prosperity outside of the rhythmic, the lavish, and a heart submitted and surrendered to the Lord in pursuit of money can easily build a castle that forgets about the foundation of actually what makes it last. Now, if you've been here, you know I'm not going to talk about these things without giving you some reference points. So if you're somebody who you recognize, man, I've got a family of origin story here that I maybe need some tweaking or development, I'm going to recommend a few books for you, right? So some books for you. One of my favorites is Freedom of Simplicity by an author by the name of Richard Foster, one of my all-time favorites. There's another one called The Treasure Principle by Randy Alcorn. Poverty, Riches, and Wealth by Chris Valentin. And here's some ones that if you were raised more in a stewardship home, you probably heard talked about. The Richest Man in Babylon by George Clason. Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. These books, and what you might find is that as you start to expose your mind to maybe false ideology or belief, it is not unto greater production of wealth. It is rather the wealth of knowing yourself and your wiring that merges you into the divine calling of a life surrendered and laid down. Because this is where prosperity gets it wrong, is we preach this spiritual discipline that produces this. But the thing is with God, stewardship is all the things put together. I should say it like this. It is all the streams of a disciplined life flowing into a beautiful reservoir in which the ecosystem is life and it is the abundance of our soul's need. You know what contentment is? Peace. How many of us can say we walk in peace? When we live contentment, what we're really saying is, I live in peace. When we talk about generosity, it's from the lens of releasing and trusting that in contentment with God, He brings peace for my soul. With that today, I want to spend some brief time on each one of these. A poverty mentality, a prosperity mentality, and a steward mentality. And I want to talk about kind of some characteristics around each of them, and I'm going to give you some kind of biblical reference points. Now, as we jump into a poverty mentality, I want to say this. I empathize as a pastor with people in this room who are experiencing great lack and need. And I would even say this, I have struggled in the present, talking about what does it mean to trust God when we are in lack, when we are in need, and when we are really like, God, I don't know what you're doing here. And as I was actually preparing for this sermon a few weeks ago, in God's grace and kindness, in the reading plan that I do, and a bunch of us do in this place, I was going through specifically Luke. And as I was going through Luke, I stumbled across this passage that so spoke to my heart that I want to speak about. So we're going to jump into Luke 21, 1 through verse 4. And it says this, "And Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts in the treasury. And he saw a poor widow putting in 2 small copper coins. And he said, 'Truly I say to you, this poor widow put more than all of them. For they out of all their surplus put into the offering, but she out of her poverty put in all that she had to live on.'" Now, what we need to understand is this, right? Jesus, yes, admonishing, yes, being like, dude, look at this woman who's giving more than these others, and you can clearly tell that she is in need and in lack. But what I actually want to point out is that Jesus is also watching her put it into the temple treasury. Why is this important? This is the same temple that literally is going to crucify him soon. These are the same religious leaders that literally want nothing to do with him. This is the same place that he is not really welcome and everybody is side-eyeing him when he's in the room. This is the same place he's going to make a whip and show up and drive the money changers out. And it is also the very same place that he's saying, look at what this woman is doing. Look at how beautiful this picture is. See, why do I say that? Because I think oftentimes we can have every viewpoint or assertion in our mind of why we shouldn't, can't, this, that. And I would even say this woman definitely had a good enough excuse. And then Jesus had an even better, shouldn't say it, but better excuse as to why it wasn't taking place. Literally, this isn't even a good temple to give to. This is the very place that's going to kill me. These are the people who hate me. This is the place I'm going to drive everybody out. But look at this woman's heart. The story is Jesus admonishing a woman who gave to the very temple that Jesus was speaking actually against. The very place that would later overturn the tables, drive out the money changers. See, generosity has always been a significant heart posture God notices regardless of the financial circumstance or the atmosphere around it. See, this is the good of it, that Jesus sees our lack, our trust, our faith, and our obedience, no matter how big or how small. The bad news is, if you lack, the president is there for you to still give, even if it's all you have. See, you can be poor and yet be rich. You can be empty but still full. Stewardship is the mindset of even if I'm currently experiencing lack, I can still experience God. Poverty is a mindset that cripples us from seeing a God who is our provider, our supplier, and our sustainer. See, oftentimes I don't want to get ahead of it. 4 thoughts on a poverty mindset rooted in need. I'm going to give you 4 thoughts on each one of these: poverty, prosperity, and stewardship. Number 1 is this: we judge what others have because if we don't have it, we think others don't deserve it. Can I tell you, this is the number 1 red flag of you're not content, is when you're just talking about everybody else's from a jealous lens. Contentment is, hey, as a Christian, I want to be celebrating God's blessings. Why? Because when I see them in front of me, I don't think, why is that not happening for me? I think, I love that God is blessing others in their faithfulness and in their righteousness. In their life, I want to be somebody who celebrates and not somebody who's critical. Why? Because all we know is criticalness. I can't tell you did you hear they got this? All we think about, lens is just the awareness of everybody else's surplus through the lens of our lack. And if all we're doing is looking at this is why I don't have social media. I can tell you I'm so much more content. Why? Because we don't even follow our friends anymore. We just got algorithms of products. All you're doing on there is you need this, you need this, you need this. No, I don't need 4,000 more sneakers. I don't need 6 more golf clubs. Second thing I have for you today is this: we have a rational reason to not be generous, and that rational reason takes the place of faith we declare to profess. I want to say this: my entire life is irrationality. What I see rob people of faith and obedience and surrender is that we sit in the rational awareness of what we lack so much that it just robs faith of what God wants to do. This entire church is because of irrational sacrifice. Me and my wife in Michigan had a job lined up to take over a church that was extremely healthy, financially set. We owned the building. I knew all the staff and hired most of them. I'd been there for 10 years. And you know what? God said, hey, I want you to plant a church in Phoenix. I'd been on one golf trip here. Hey, I want you to move. I know you don't have a house. I know you don't have a church building. We knew no one here. You know what that sounds like? Irrational. But I'm going to tell you this. Something about doing irrational things allows you to see a dimension of God's goodness that you can no longer discount, discredit, or walk away from. Or deconstruct in. Discount, discredit, or deconstruct. Many of us were robbing God, no pun intended, of an opportunity for him to reveal himself as our source, sustainer, and supplier that we could not walk away from in our faith anymore if we actually saw him this way. Like for me, even no matter how hard life gets, I've seen God so much. No matter how many people I have lost, no matter how many people have walked away, no matter the brokenness I've experienced in my own life, I have seen God respond in such ways that I could never leave him. See, this is what happens with stewardship. When every river and stream of the disciplined life flows into the reservoir in which we experience the deep, rich beauty of life in God. And I'm telling you this today because stewardship is me stewarding time, attention, resource for the glory of God. Poverty is when I can't steward anything because the only way I see God is through the lens of what I lack and what he hasn't given me. Third thing, we look upon those who we think are rich and think they should be forced to give more to make up for what I cannot. Not realizing that withholding from God is just another layer of greed we try to tell ourselves it isn't. Need can produce greed just as much as greed produces greed. Need can produce greed just as much as greed can produce greed. And I want to say this, once again, back to my journey, I've went through years and years and years of faithful obedience. And I think this is what I want to invite you into. If you're in a season right now of lack, if you're in a season of wondering, wishing, hoping, when we do these things, these disciplines rhythmically over and over and over, what happens is this one day, and I can't tell you when, can't tell you how, and I don't know why, when, whatever. I can tell you this, me and my wife just talked about this. You wake up one day and you look around and you go, I don't know how I got what I got. I don't know how God blessed my life the way that he did. I have no understanding of where this all came from. All I know is he's been faithful. The fourth one is this, we only view the world through our need. And we seek to position ourselves relationally and personally to try to, in our own strength, produce more comfort for our situation, using and leveraging others for gain. When we are generous, we are saying, you meet my needs, you have all the power, you are my identity, and you are the greatest influence in my life. You know, I would not trade living in America for anything. I love living in America. But I want to say this, there is some beauty of capitalism and there is also some other aspects of it. And the aspect is sometimes we can be trained to view people as resources, that as individuals that we are meant to extract resource from. In the attention economy, we are trying to sell through attention or position ourselves in networks or around people to gain more affluence or gain more access or develop new relationships. And I'm not saying inherently all of this is bad, but when you function from poverty and prosperity, this can easily be not, how do I bring the gospel? How do I develop deep, rich relationship and friendship? But rather, how do I get what I want from somebody? Poverty can do that just as much as prosperity can. I got to meet the right people. I got to mingle with the right ones that can open up the doors for me to get what I really want out of life, to find the comfort, the power, the image, whatever it is. And I'm trying to tell you this. People are the greatest resource. Relationships, the greatest riches. It is not your net worth, it is your network. And if you would be somebody who views people as God's creation and interacts with people not from the basis of what can I extract from them, you might find that that actually brings you more riches than a bank account ever could. Now let's talk about prosperity. Jesus' words on greed found in Luke 12:15 through 21 says this. Then he said to them, beware and be on guard against every form of greed. For not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions. And he told them a parable saying, the land of a rich man was very productive. And he began reasoning to himself saying, what shall I do since I have no place to store my crops? Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store my grain and goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you. And now, who will own what you've prepared? So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. You can be rich in earthly wealth, but not rich in legacy. See, this passage is about a man who's building up barns, but missing the invitation to build a life in God that leads and leaves legacy. See, your possessions will just get handed off, but your name and how you will be talked about, what you will be remembered for, that is something that is priceless. And I want to invite you into the realization that stewardship is a life of rhythmic discipline that takes ownership of what my name will be remembered for. What my life will be remembered for. Not what my money says I am, but rather how I lived and who I lived for. Last year, my favorite teaching that I gave was actually called Poison in the Pot, because to let everybody off the hook, prosperity, or I should say this, greed, we all were born into it. We all were. And last year we talked about what does it mean when we recognize there's poison in the pot of our souls to redeem what we've been consuming so that we would become healthy. On any podcast platform, you can look it up. I encourage you in homework. Poison in the Pot was one of my favorite teachings from last year. Because what you have to understand is seeking earthly riches without guardrails of both rhythmic and lavish generosity leaves your soul spiritually deficient as it struggles to grapple with true lordship, surrender, and obedience. You know, Joshua 7 and 8, I'm going to paraphrase this. Did you know that AI is in the Bible? Whoa. Oh. They're taking over. Joshua 7 and 8. It says the people of Israel have just defeated Jericho. And when they defeated Jericho, they are going up against another town. And this town is like tiny compared to Jericho. Does not have any of the resources, none of the battle, none of the walls, none of the weapons. And so it literally says the leaders gather together and they're like, AI, like send 50 people up there, we'll be fine. So they send up 50 and guess what? 32 get killed. They didn't lose one person in battle against Jericho. And they fight this little tiny town and 32 people get killed. Now what's funny is the leaders come together. And they go, all right, what's going on? We need to pray. We need to discern what's going on. And what they do is through praying and discerning, they find out that there was one person in this 1,000,000-person multitude that when the command against Jericho came forward and they said, hey, destroy everything. Take nothing with you. This person saw some gold and some silver, and they buried it in a tent. They buried it in the ground in their tent. And it said that this brought about a judgment from God in which God allowed them to lose the battle because they withheld the victory of the previous battle. What if I told you that some of us, we're believing for future battles, not being faithful with the ones we're in right now? Whew, sorry, we talking finances. I don't get no amens, but I'll preach at a wall, right? I'm going to eat some nails today. I'm telling you this. We can be praying for future battles, not being faithful with the ones we've walked in today. God, what are you doing? Where are you? I'm telling you this. I've got deep conviction on this, not because I'm the pastor of a church, but because I live a life in which I have no idea what I have. I have no idea how I've gotten it. All I know is this. I have lived in the Word of God. I have lived in prayer. I have lived in worship. I've lived in fasting. I've lived in Sabbath. I've lived in generosity. And God has blown my mind. I'm not that old, if you couldn't tell. The invitation to take seriously the call of a devoted life and a holy life is not an invitation for something out there that might come. It is actually an invitation for you to realize there is a heaven that you can experience on earth. But stewardship is not did you give your money. It is did you give your time? Did you give your attention? Did you give the most valuable things in trust that the God of this universe can assign new value to your sacrifice? 4 thoughts on prosperity mindset that's rooted in greed. 4 thoughts on a prosperity mindset rooted in greed. Number 1, is accumulating money for my glory, or is it rhythmically and routinely partnered in generosity for His? You can't say He gets the glory if the only thing you use your finances on is to produce your own. If the only reason we're seeking to gain is to build bigger barns, we are the people talked about in this story. I'm going to tell you this, if I get more, it's not for me to live at a higher level. It is for God's kingdom to flow through me. God has supplied in my life. I am content in my life. I trust God with my life. Second thing is this. Do I have contentment and gratitude for what I have currently? Or does a feeling of lack rooted in comparison and coveting fuel my lifestyle to always have more? The feeling of lack, comparison, coveting, that fuels a lifestyle that says, God, I need more. Number 3 is this. As my life is elevated, is my generosity elevated? You can give and still be greedy. For bare minimum effort and activity gets bare minimum fruit, just as much as no effort and activity gives no fruit. I said this earlier. As my life develops, as I'm spending more time in the Word, as I'm spending more time in prayer, as I'm developing the gifts from God, I am developing my generosity too. Once again, we're all about being discipled and developed, but don't touch that bank account. And I'm not telling, this is part of transformation process, of renewing the mind in the image of Christ, of trusting, believing, and having faith. And I want to encourage you, in 2 weeks, I'm going to preach on our doctrine of dependency. Because what I believe, and it's not your fault, is we've preached an independent religion of God. God, I do these things, but I've constructed my life in a place of not needing you at all. And then we wonder why we don't really believe He exists. Because we don't really actually need Him or depend on Him for anything. We rob Him of the opportunity to show in our dependence that He's there. And I'm not going to live a life that doesn't depend on God to reveal new nature, new dimension, and new perspective of His goodness. Number 4 is this. Greed is foundationally about power and control. We inadvertently become our own God, not realizing we gained the whole world and lost our souls. We're not in control. We do not have ultimate power. Generosity is about submitting your thirst for power and your need for control to God, and trust He brings fulfillment we need. God is your fulfillment, for He literally created it. He is your joy because He created it. He is your happiness. He's the one who created it. He's your peace. He's the one who created it. So in your ability to try to control, I want to challenge you. Release and trust that the one who even created the Word could show you that He is in control. My final kind of thoughts on stewardship. Luke 16:10 through verse 13 says this. He who is faithful in very little things is also faithful in much. And he who is unrighteous in very little things is unrighteous in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the use of unrighteous wealth, who will entrust true riches? And if you have not been faithful in the use of which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? For no servant can serve 2 masters. Either he'll hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Colossians 3:23 and 24 says, whatever you do, do your work heartily and as for the Lord rather than men, knowing from the Lord you receive the reward of an inheritance, for it is the Lord Christ whom you serve. I say this because, once again, stewardship, prosperity, is a hyperfixation on one spiritual discipline that we believe is going to produce the intended result of our materialistic existence. Stewardship, all of our life's rhythmic spiritual discipline streams flowing into this place of rich proximity to God, in which we would be holy, righteous, unto discerning and sensing the Spirit of God around us and within us at all times. Couple thoughts to end us out here. Stewardship is time, attention, and resource. 4 thoughts on stewardship. Number 1 is this: I have rigid routine in my time, attention, and resource that circumstances don't dictate deviation from. Man, I'm going to tell you, circumstance dictates deviation. But when we start flowing and being with God, what you'll find is no matter what circumstance, you mentally, spiritually, emotionally are above it. That yes, there might be circumstances that are fighting against the foundations, but when we've lived in such a way, those foundations, they just don't move. You know, there's a passage of Scripture, or it's not a passage, it's a specific translation on the house that's built on the sand and on the rock. The specific translation, and I'm forgetting which one it is, I promise it's real, it says that when torrents break against the foundation, you'll stay standing. So the other ones say when the waves come, but torrents in the specific translation is when steady streams of continuous, strong, overpowering water break against the foundations of your life, you'll stand. When steady streams of continually strong, overpowering water break against your foundations, you stay strong. But you have to understand that circumstances do not dictate deviation. Number 2, I own the little things related to my time, attention, and resource because I know it makes a big difference. Many of us, we think it's the big things that lead us down the wrong paths. Oh, it's the little ones. The things that you permit, the things that you allow, the rational reasoning that you have of why you don't do certain things. I mean, we are a knowledge economy, meaning never in human history do we have more knowledge at our fingertips. And that is both a beauty and a curse, because you can find knowledge that tells you what to do and also knowledge that tells you what not to do. And then in there you can develop your own rational reasoning as to why you don't do it. See, what am I trying to get at? We have to own the little things that lead us in directions we don't even know we're going until we get to the place where we're at a destination we didn't even know we were trying to get to. And in my life, I can tell you it's not big things that lead me down the wrong path, it's little things. These little thoughts, these little ideas, these little rational understandings, I'm telling you, own the little things with your time, your attention, your resource. Number 3, the stewardship of my time, attention, and resources, all unto greater sensitivity and deeper discernment. If you weren't here, I preached this a few weeks ago. For our church, the focus is not for you to live righteous and holy, that one day you will get to heaven. The focus of righteousness and holiness is that you would live in a deep, discerning, and sensitive way to the Spirit of God all around you. If Christ died for His omnipresence to be given to His people, I would say the gift of today is getting to know that omnipresent. That's why Hearing God Retreat is an incredible opportunity, because you might find that God still wants to speak to you. He wants to go deeper with you. And then in this day and age, we've taught that you have to have all this theological underpinning. You might find it is way more simpler than you think. Deeper sensitivity and deeper discernment is just, will you live righteous and holy long enough to start to taste of a drink you maybe have never tasted before? My final point for you today. And by final, I'm going to, there it is. Once I start in the stewardship journey, there's a strong resistance at first that slowly gives way to a realization that I cannot stop, as it has become the fuel of my daily existence and communion with God. I cannot stop. Many of us in this room, you are keenly aware of resistance in your heart. Keenly aware of what I cannot do because X, Y, Z, this, that, the other. Okay? Resistance we are keenly familiar with. But what you may find is that if you will put up with fighting against this resistance, there becomes a strength that is developed. And this strength over time is to lift maybe a new load that you didn't think you could carry. And then ultimately it actually becomes an ease to lift loads and to carry. And not only that, you start to find there's a fuel in your life of beating and fighting, and then the resistance is gone, and it's actually just peace is the product. I can tell you this in my life. I've lived not very long, but I've paid cost of resistance in seasons in which I had every excuse, not just to not give, but not be in my word. The feeling wasn't there. The emotion wasn't there. I was mad at God for whatever it is. We fight resistance, and I promise when we fight it one day, there isn't resistance, and we don't know where it stopped. We only know there's peace. And we fight against resistance until we uncover peace. And if we're being resisted against, you better believe there's an invitation to peace behind it. I'm challenging you. If you have a resistance right now in your life around stewardship, there's also can be a peace. If you have a tension in your heart, there can also be a peace. Why? Because when we seek first kingdom and righteousness, all things are added. When it talks about the Holy Spirit and God being the Prince of Peace, but the Holy Spirit being the comforter, the advocate, and the standby, these aren't just words written about thousands of years ago. They're the very words we're reading today, inviting us into a life of communion with Him. I challenge us. Would we be stewards today of our time, our attention, and our resource? Would you stand to your feet today?